Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode in this series. My name is Mark, and I'm going to be talking about Magic: The Gathering. And again, like our last videos, I've got another Commander deck here today. Um, this one is again created by a player in our community, and the title of the deck is Legendary Things. And the commander of this deck, and this is kind of an interesting little bit for people who want to learn about color identity of commanders. So the commander is Sisay Weatherlight Captain. It's 2 and a white for a 2/2 human soldier. It says Sisay Weatherlight Captain gets +1/+1 for each color among other legendary permanents you control. And then it says that you can pay a white, a blue, a black, a red, and a green, or Wooburg. And you can search your library for a legendary permanent card with mana value less than Sisay's power, and put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So this commander deck is technically a 5-color deck because of the commander having the activated ability requiring all 5 colors. So because of the color identity rules of commander, it lets you play all 5 colors in your deck. So the gist of this deck is we are trying to get different colors of legendary permanents and use those to buff up Sisay's power, and then use that increased power to then go and search for potentially really big legendary things. Now, you will sometimes hear decks like this, maybe they get referred to as a quote-unquote good stuff deck. And you certainly could apply that logic to this deck as well. Another way that you could refer to a deck like this is as a pile, which is more of a reference to it's leaning more into the idea that the cards don't particularly synergize that well, and they just sort of do different things in the game. So I think either one of those is plausibly appropriate for this deck. So let's dig into it a little bit here. So in a perfect world, what you're doing is you're trying to get all 5 colors among your legendary permanents so that Sisay can get as big as quickly as possible. And there are a handful of 3-color legendaries in this deck. We've got Derevi Imperial Tactician, we've got Kethis the Hidden Hand, we've got Mr. Orfeo the Boulder. And I particularly like Mr. Orfeo because he says whenever you attack, double target creature's power until end of turn. So, you go and you attack and you double Sisay's power. Well, even if Mr. Orfeo was the only other legendary permanent in play, it has 3 other colors, black, red, and green. So that creature being on the battlefield by itself is making Sisay a 5/5. And if you choose Sisay as the creature that gets its power doubled until end of turn, its power becomes 10, and then if you can activate the ability, you can go find a 10 mana legendary thing, just thanks to Mr. Orfeo. So that's kind of a neat little uh, grouping of cards. We've got Surrak Dragon's Claw. That's another 3-color one. We've got Teneb the Harvester. So those are some of the 3-color ones. And we have a handful of 2-color ones, which is also good. But then we have a couple that are all 5 colors. So we have the Dragon, which is a pretty popular commander in its own right, and it does not fit the theme of this deck at all. But it's such an insanely powerful card by itself that if it gets into play, it can kind of take over the game on its own. Then we have sort of a sneaky one here, and so we have this Asika, God of the Tree, which is a double-faced card, and on the front, it's this 1 and 2 green legendary creature that lets you add 1 mana of any color and says legendary creatures you control have vigilance and tap for 1 mana of any color. But the flip side of it is this all 5-color legendary enchantment called the Prismatic Bridge. And what the Prismatic Bridge does isn't really as important as the fact that it is all 5 colors and it is legendary, and that is important for Sisay. Now, if we look at the rest of the creatures, because that's the majority of the legendary permanents in the deck, there are some other ones for sure, but if we look at the creatures, I mean, this is very, very much a pile of cards. You have the Reality Chip, which is a legendary equipment jellyfish, and lets you, if it's equipped, it lets you play cards at the top of your library. We have Omnath, Locus of Mana, which wants you to have exclusively green mana, but this is a 5-color deck. So it's legitimately just wild in a deck like this. In terms of some of our cards that are just independently good cards, we already talked about the Dragon. We got a card like Aurelia the War Leader, which can just give you 2 combat steps in a turn. We've got Kembal, Consul of Allocation. That one is going to drain your opponents and help you gain life when they cast non-creature spells. We've got Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight, which is doubling the damage that is dealt to your opponents and their permanents, and is cutting in half the damage that is dealt to you and your permanents. So a lot of pretty good independent cards. Now, another element to this deck is the lands. So you'll see here that there are 39 lands, which is it's probably on the upper end of what you will typically see in a commander deck. Not that it's necessarily too many or anything, but it's probably toward the upper end of what you would typically see in a commander deck for sure. What's interesting here is we've got all of these gates. We've got Zurius Guild Gate, Boros Guild Gate. We've got the gates for all of the Ravnica guilds, and then we've got a handful of other gates like Baldur's Gate and Gateway Plaza and all that stuff. Well, that's technically another win condition because of this card, Maze's End. It says that it enters the battlefield tapped, and then you can tap it for 1 when you want to just use it to make mana. But it also has this ability that you pay 3 and you can return it to your hand, and then you search your library for a gate card, put it on the battlefield, and shuffle your library. And then if you control 10 or more gates with different names, you win the game. So it's just a card that if you can get 10 different gates and when you activate this, then you just win the game. And so that sort of informs why we're playing a card like Azusa Lost But Seeking, where it says you can play 2 additional lands on each of your turns. Then we've got a couple creatures in here that allow us to get to Sisay's 5 different mana color activation abilities. So we've got Bloom Tender. It's not a legend, but it says that it taps for each color among permanents you control. So if you have all 5 color of permanent, then Bloom Tender is going to tap for all 5 color of mana, which is good enough to activate Sisay. Then we also have Gigantha the Wellspring, and we're not using its companion ability in this particular deck, but it has this ability. It says that tap and add 1 mana of each color, and this mana can't be spent to pay generic mana costs. That limitation doesn't matter when we're using it to activate Sisay. We can just tap it and we can use it to activate Sisay. And so one of the potential combos in this deck is with this other legend, Najeela the Blade Blossom. It says whenever a warrior attacks, you may have its controller add or create a 1/1 white warrior creature token that's tapped and attacking. That ability is less relevant than its other ability, which is to pay 1 of each color, untap all attacking creatures. They gain trample, lifelink, and haste until end of turn. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Activate this ability only during combat. So where this becomes relevant is if we're able to activate Gigantha somehow, or if we're able to activate Bloom Tender somehow, and they're part of the attacking creatures, but we can also get them to tap for their mana, then we can have infinite combat steps. In theory. Or enough combat steps to win the game. I shouldn't say infinite. One of the easiest ways to achieve this would be to give those creatures vigilance. But there's a variety of other things that could happen. Then there's a handful of. We've got 1 legendary planeswalker, Teferi Time Raveler. We've got a legendary enchantment, Flowering of the White Tree. And then we have a bunch of legendary artifacts. We have Mox Amber. Blackblade Reforged is another good way to buff up Sisay, as it will give the creature it's equipped to +1/+1 for each land you control. Helm of the Host. Hero's Podium, which is going to let your legendary creatures get +1/+1 for each other legendary creature you control. Chroma's Memorial, Avacyn's Memorial, Great Henge. These are all legendary artifacts. There are a couple of legendary lands in here. I don't know how often you would go and find those. Like Akina, Temple to the Grandfathers, Odawara, Soaring City, Sakenzen, Shizo, Shinka, Takanuma, Yavimaya. Yavimaya is the one that you might go find in some situations. And then there's kind of a couple of these Legends Matter spells, if you will. We've got Urza's Ruinous Blast. It says exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary. So since the majority of your creatures are legendary, then that's pretty good. Then you got Primeval's Glorious Rebirth. Return all legendary permanent cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if your legends die, then you can get them back with this spell. And then we got, kind of the topper of all toppers to this deck. It's Kozilek, Butcher of Truth. It's a 10 mana 12/12 legendary Eldrazi with Annihilator 4, which is awful. Yeah. We don't really have to get too deep into it. Got this risky card here, Mana Flare. It basically says it lands for everybody, tap for an additional mana of the type they could produce. This is just making it so you can get extra Sisay activations. You know, all in all, a lot of these cards, like I said, they're just sort of a pile of cards in this deck, and they can they can build into kind of a crazy big finish to the game. Other times it can just be a deck like this can be a little bit clunky and awkward because it takes us a while to get to the point that we can start piecing all of these things together sometimes, and so that can be a little bit tricky. The pilot of this deck, in a game that I was playing with them one time, they lamented the fact that their deck does not have a basic mountain in it, and then proceeded to lament that fact again a couple of other times, and has continued to talk about, well, this has been going on for months, and this deck list still does not have a mountain in it. And when I was talking about making this video, they were saying, well, you probably better suggest putting a mountain in there. And I'm like, you have suggested putting a mountain in there, and it's not in there yet. So the reason that I choose to bring that up is because, in my opinion, whenever you play a 5-color, or really any amount of colors, commander deck, having at least one mana or one basic land of each land type is actually kind of important because of the prevalence of the removal spell Path to Exile. It's just so common to see. And this deck's not playing Path to Exile, but it's actually playing Assassin's Trophy, which destroys a permanent, lets the permanent's controller search their library for a basic land and put it on the battlefield. And then they have Winds of Abandon, which exiles a creature you don't control, and then when it gets exiled that way, they search their library for a basic land. So, I mean, removal that lets you go find basic lands is pretty common, and so just not having one of each if you're playing a 5-color deck, you're just going to have times where you miss out on being able to get the color you're looking for. So that's just one observation that was really kind of brought up by the pilot of this deck, and we're just talking about it here. If I'm giving feedback on a deck like this, one of the dangers that I have, just from a play perspective, that I have always felt with decks like this, that kind of what they want to be doing is searching through their library to find specific cards. One of the dangers is that it starts to feel repetitive. Like, a lot of times you'll just end up going and finding the same cards. And so, even though, when I made the reference to, good stuff, or it being kind of a pile, from a varied gameplay standpoint, having the deck be built that way makes it a lot more likely that you're going to go and look for different stuff in different game situations. And to me, that especially if you're not looking to have, oh, I do this and then I do this and then I combo and then I win. No, I kind of want to have a little more variety than that. That's really going to be a lot better in the grand scheme of things. Do I think that there is, if the goal was to improve the overall consistency and quality of a deck like this, would you have some changes you could make? Yes, a million percent. You could definitely make this more focused and more streamlined, and just have a more sort of consistent together type of a plan. That being said, I think having sort of a little bit of slightly disjointed uh, deck construction where it's not quite so focused is really getting to the heart of what Commander was when it was originally a format. And since I've been playing personally been playing Commander since that time, it's really it's honestly just kind of nice to be seeing people that are doing those kinds of things and enjoying those kinds of things. And if at some point uh, a deck like this starts to become more focused, it starts to become more streamlined, that's great. I have no qualm with it, but I do want to point out and appreciate how much this deck points in the direction of what Commander was, especially in its beginning. So, uh, thank you everybody for watching. Um, I've said it at the end of all of these videos that I've done, and I want to continue to say it. I really appreciate people being willing to submit their deck lists for me to be able to do this and talk about different cards that they play. I've already had some comments from people talking about uh, they really appreciate the ideas that they're able to get from just kind of looking at the different constructions of people's decks and how much diversity is in all of the strategies that they have. So I really appreciate everybody being willing to contribute to really our community of players in that way. So thank you. I love you all. I hope you have a wonderful, beautiful rest of your day. And we'll see you here again next time. Peace.